AITA for not taking my fiancée back after she cheated, even though she's pregnant. I never thought my life would turn into one of those trashy reality show plots, but here I am. One minute, I was planning a future with the woman I loved, picking out wedding venues, talking about honeymoon destinations, picturing a life together. The next, I was finding out she had been sneaking around behind my back for months. It still doesn't feel real. We had been together for almost 5 years, and for most of that time, I truly believed she was the one. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I could tell anything to. We moved in together last year, and after I proposed, I felt like I had finally gotten everything I ever wanted. I wasn't naive, I knew relationships weren't perfect. We had little arguments, sure. She got annoyed when I left dishes in the sink, I got frustrated when she spent too much on things we didn't need. But it was normal stuff. Nothing that ever made me think she wasn't happy. Nothing that made me suspect she was capable of what she did. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from a mutual friend. I was at work, buried in emails, barely paying attention when I answered. But the second I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. His tone was hesitant, almost like he didn't want to tell me what he had seen. And then he did. My fiancée. Out at a restaurant. With another man. Holding hands. Kissing. Acting like they were a couple. At first, I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe my friend had just seen someone who looked like her. Maybe it was all some misunderstanding. But the second I got home and confronted her, I saw the truth written all over her face. The way she hesitated. The way her shoulders tensed. The way she tried to come up with something to say, only to realize there was no way out of it. She had been cheating. And not just once. 4 months. I don't even remember leaving. One second, I was standing in our apartment, feeling like the air had been knocked out of my lungs, and the next, I was driving aimlessly through the city, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Everything we had built, our home, our future, our life together, was a lie. I ignored her texts. I ignored her calls. I didn't want to hear whatever excuses she had. What could she possibly say that would make it better? And then, a week later, she sent one final message. One sentence that made my entire world stop. She was pregnant. And suddenly, nothing was simple anymore. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, the words blurring together. Pregnant. My mind kept repeating it, trying to force some kind of understanding. The same woman who had lied to me for months, who had smiled in my face while sneaking around behind my back, was now telling me she was carrying my child. I didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or throw my phone across the room. Was this some kind of manipulation tactic? A desperate attempt to guilt me into staying? Or was she telling the truth? And, the most haunting question of all, was it even mine? The doubt crawled into my chest like poison. I sat there, running through the timeline in my head, trying to do the math. She had admitted to the affair lasting for months. That meant there was a very real possibility that this wasn't my child at all. Maybe she knew that. Maybe that was why she waited until now to tell me. I wanted to ignore her. I wanted to delete the message and move on with my life. But no matter how much I hated her, how much I despised the person she had become, I couldn't ignore the fact that if this baby was mine, I had a responsibility. So, for the first time since I walked out, I agreed to meet her. The moment I saw her, a wave of emotions crashed over me: anger, hurt, confusion, disgust. She looked different. Tired, anxious, a little desperate. But I wasn't there to comfort her. I wasn't there to hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. I was there for answers. She spoke softly, cautiously, like she was afraid of setting me off. She told me she had found out a few weeks ago but didn't know how to tell me. She swore, over and over again, that the baby was mine, that she had always been careful with the other guy, that she never wanted to hurt me. Her words felt empty. This was the same person who had lied to my face for months. The same person who had let me plan a future with her while secretly building something with someone else. And now, after everything, she expected me to just believe her? I sat there, staring at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Finally, I told her the only thing that mattered: I wasn't agreeing to anything until we got a DNA test. Her entire expression changed. First, it was shock, like she couldn't believe I was questioning her. Then, it shifted into hurt, disappointment. She looked at me as if I had just shattered some illusion in her head, as if she had truly expected me to just accept this and take her back. I didn't care. I wasn't going to let my life be dictated by her word alone. Not after everything she had done. Not after she had already proven that she was more than capable of lying when it suited her. If she was telling the truth, then fine, I would step up and be a father. I wasn't the type to run from responsibility. But if I found out that this child was the result of her betrayal, then I was walking away. For good. And nothing she said would change that. Story number 2. AITA for not attending my mom's wedding because she's marrying my ex. There are betrayals that you never see coming, the kind that hit you so hard, they don't just hurt, they rewrite everything you thought you knew about a person. This was one of those betrayals. I always knew my relationship with my mom was complicated. She was never the motherly type, never the kind of person to put her kids before herself. Growing up, I learned early on that she would always chase what made her happy, no matter how it affected anyone else. But this was a new level of selfishness. It started a year after my breakup. My ex and I had been together for almost 3 years before things fell apart. It wasn't some explosive ending, no cheating, no huge fights, but the relationship had turned cold. He grew distant, we argued more, and eventually, he told me he just wasn't in love anymore. It crushed me, but I accepted it. What I didn't know was that he wasn't just moving on, he was moving on to my mother. I didn't find out right away. They kept it hidden for months. The first time I noticed something was off was when my mom started bringing up my ex in casual conversations. She would mention running into him at the grocery store or seeing a post of his on social media. At first, I thought nothing of it, until it started happening too often. Then came the lies. She would make excuses for why she had to cancel plans. She started dressing differently, more like she did when she was younger, trying to look fresh and youthful. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking things. But then, one night, I saw it. I was out with friends when I spotted them together. Sitting at a restaurant, just the two of them, leaning in close, laughing like they shared some inside joke. My stomach dropped. I felt like I was in some twisted dream where the world no longer made sense. I confronted her the next day, my heart pounding as I asked the question I already knew the answer to. And she didn't even try to deny it. I didn't mean for it to happen, she had said. But we have a connection. A connection. With my ex. It felt like my mother had reached into my chest and ripped something out of me. I stopped talking to both of them after that. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming fight, I just cut them off. I needed distance. I needed time to process the fact that the woman who gave birth to me was now dating the man who had once told me he loved me. Then, 6 months later, she dropped the real bombshell. She was getting married. And she expected me to be there. I sat there, staring at my phone, rereading the message over and over. She was getting married. And not just to anyone, to my ex. She didn't ask me if I was okay with it. She didn't acknowledge the absolute insanity of the situation. She just sent a casual, almost cheerful invitation, like she was inviting me to a family barbecue. I know this might be a little unexpected, but I really hope you can come. It would mean a lot to me. A little unexpected? I felt sick. For months, I had been trying to move on. To erase the image of them together from my mind. To stop feeling like my own mother had taken something from me. And now she was expecting me to sit in the front row, smiling, watching as she married the man I had once planned a future with. The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil. I didn't reply right away. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? Sure, Mom, I'd love to watch you walk down the aisle toward a man who once called me the love of his life. A week passed before she reached out again. This time, she called. I ignored it. Then she called again. And again. Finally, I picked up, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to make one thing clear. I wasn't coming. The second she heard my voice, she started with the fake, concerned mother act. Asking if I was okay, telling me she didn't want things to be tense between us. I wasn't interested in small talk. I told her, flat out, that I wouldn't be at the wedding. I wasn't going to pretend to be happy for her. I wasn't going to put myself through the humiliation of watching her marry my ex like this was just some normal, romantic love story. She didn't take it well. She launched into a speech about how love is unpredictable and how she and my ex just happened to fall for each other. She said she didn't want to lose me over a man, as if she hadn't already chosen him over me the second she started sneaking around behind my back. Then came the guilt trip. She told me I was being immature. That I was holding on to resentment instead of being happy for her. That I was throwing away our relationship over something that's in the past. She didn't get it. This wasn't just about an ex. It wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about the betrayal. About the fact that a mother should never, never, look at the person her child loved and think, I want him for myself. But she didn't see it that way. The final straw was when she told me she had already told the rest of the family that I'd be there. That she had assured them I'd come around, that I'd be mature enough to support her. Like I was some selfish, petty child for not wanting to celebrate my mother marrying a man I had once loved. That's when I hung up. She tried calling back. I didn't answer. She sent messages, long paragraphs about forgiveness and family and not ruining her big day. But I was done. I knew then that I wasn't just skipping the wedding. I was done with her. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Story number 3. AITA for secretly DNA testing my child because I had doubts? I never thought I'd be the kind of person to doubt my own child. The thought alone made me feel guilty, like I was some paranoid, untrusting person. But sometimes, doubts don't just appear out of nowhere. Sometimes, they start as tiny whispers in the back of your mind, growing louder and louder until you can't ignore them anymore. For me, it started as something small. My son was born a little over a year ago. When I first held him in my arms, I was overwhelmed, by love, by responsibility, by the sheer weight of knowing I was now someone's father. He was tiny, delicate, perfect. I remember looking at him and thinking, this is it. This is the moment my life changes forever. I never questioned anything at first. My fiancée and I had been together for 4 years, and while we'd had our ups and downs, I had always trusted her. She had never given me a reason not to. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or at least, I thought we were. Then, little things started chipping away at that trust. It started when people, friends, family, even strangers, began commenting on how our son didn't look like me at all. I shrugged it off at first. Babies change, right? They grow into their features. But the comments kept coming. Wow, he's adorable. He must take after his mom, huh? It's crazy, you'd never guess he was yours. Are you sure he didn't get swapped at the hospital? That one was a joke. At least, I think it was. At first, I laughed along with them. But after a while, it stopped being funny. Then, I started noticing the differences myself. My fiancé and I both have dark hair, our son's hair was light. My eyes are brown, his were bright blue. His skin tone was just a little different, his features just slightly off. Nothing huge, nothing obvious. Just enough. Enough to make my stomach turn every time I looked at him and wondered. And then there was the timing. Our son was born 8 months after we got engaged. My fiancé had always claimed he was just a little early, that he was born a few weeks premature. But when I did the math, something didn't add up. We hadn't been trying for a baby when she told me she was pregnant. In fact, we had been going through a rough patch. A time when things felt strained, when she had been distant, when I had wondered if something was wrong. The thought that had been buried deep in my mind finally surfaced in full force. What if he isn't mine? It felt like an awful, disgusting thing to even consider. This was my child. I had been there for every moment, every late-night feeding, every doctor's visit, every diaper change. I had loved him unconditionally from the second he was born. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. So, I made a decision. I ordered a DNA test. And I didn't tell my fiancé. I felt guilty the entire time I was doing it. The moment the test arrived in the mail, my hands were shaking as I opened the package. I knew what I was doing was wrong, or at least, it felt wrong. If my fiancé found out, she would be furious. She would say I was betraying her trust, that I was accusing her of something terrible. But at the same time, wasn't I the one who had been betrayed first, if my gut feeling was right? I told myself I wasn't looking for a reason to leave. I just needed to know. I needed clarity. If I was wrong, then fine, I would live with the guilt. I would never bring it up. But if I was right. I swabbed my son's cheek while she was out running errands. He giggled when I did it, smiling up at me with his bright blue eyes, the ones that didn't match mine. It made me hesitate for a second, but I pushed through, sealing the sample and mailing it off. The waiting was torture. Every day, I found myself staring at my son, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Telling myself that if the test came back confirming he was mine, would have to live with the fact that I had doubted him. That I had doubted her. And then, the results came in. I opened the email with my heart pounding in my chest, my fingers hovering over the screen. The words hit me like a truck. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it again. And again. And again. It didn't change. He wasn't mine. My stomach dropped. My ears started ringing. It felt like the entire world had shifted beneath my feet, like I had just stepped into some alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. I wasn't his father. The little boy I had been raising, loving, holding in my arms for over a year, wasn't mine. I sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for the emotions to hit me. Anger, sadness, maybe even relief that I had trusted my instincts. But all I felt was numb. And then, slowly, the numbness turned into something else. Rage. I looked over at my phone, my fiancé's name sitting at the top of my messages. She had texted me just a few minutes earlier, a simple, "Can you pick up some milk on your way home?" Smiling face with smiling eyes. As if nothing had happened. As if she wasn't sitting on the biggest lie of my life. I had two choices. I could wait. Pretend I didn't know. Confront her when I was calmer, when I had time to process it all. Or, I could walk through that door and tell her I knew everything. I grabbed my keys. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The drive home felt like a blur. My fingers were clenched around the steering wheel, my mind replaying the same thought over and over. She lied to me. Every moment from the past year, the late nights rocking my son to sleep, the first time he grabbed my finger, the way he would light up when I walked into the room, all of it had been built on a lie. I wasn't his father. I never had been. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I didn't want to walk in blind with rage. I needed answers. I needed the truth, all of it. The second I stepped inside, she greeted me like it was any other day. Smiling. Unbothered. She had no idea that, in the span of a few hours, my entire world had collapsed. I didn't play along. I pulled my phone out, opened the email, and placed it on the counter between us. She frowned, confused, until she read it. I watched her face shift. First, confusion. Then realization. Then, panic. She didn't even try to deny it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she started rambling. She didn't mean for it to happen. She had been scared. She didn't know how to tell me. She thought the baby could be mine, but she wasn't sure, and by the time she found out for sure, I had already fallen in love with him, and she didn't want to take that away from me. Take that away from me? Like she had done me some kind of favor by keeping me in the dark. Like she had given me a gift instead of stealing the choice from me. The more she talked, the more I realized, she never planned on telling me. If I hadn't taken the test, I would have spent the rest of my life believing I was this child's father. I would have poured everything I had into raising a son that was never mine. She begged me not to leave. She said that I was the only father he had ever known, that biology didn't matter, that I was still his dad where it counted. I wanted to believe that. I looked at my son, playing on the floor, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to change. I loved him. God, I loved him. But I also knew that every time I looked at him, I would see the lie. I would see the betrayal. I would wonder who his real father was, if he knew, if he cared. I couldn't do it. So, I walked away. I packed my things, I told her I wanted nothing to do with her, and I left. She screamed, cried, begged me to reconsider. She swore she'd do anything to fix it. But there was no fixing this. My son, no, not my son. The child I had been raising would never know me. And that was the hardest thing I have ever done.